I've prepared 2 talks here, and just because this is the tax preparation season, one of them's the long form and the other's the short form. So we could have a show of hands. Do you want the short form or the long form?
The long form.
Whatever you feel.
I know if it was
But Linda has already told me it will be the short form.
Well,
I'd like to throw the president up in the
We
air.
Yeah.
said, why don't you just do like the president, throw it up in the air?
Oh, exactly. Just think, truly, that's what I could do. This is the easiest painting.
Oh, yeah.
There, that's modern art.
Minimalist.
This is only 1 page, this mess here, so I might just do it. My first painting was done in the early 1960s in high school. It was a very labored, thickly painted, repainted effort of a high school beginner. By my last year in high school, my teacher Hans Kappes had led me to paint much more quickly and directly. Of course, you see the 50-year later result of that. A lot of fast paintings. Quality we don't know about. Early efforts in painting painting outside were disastrous. The clouds and the light kept changing. I took a few art and art history courses at the University of Minnesota while majoring in architecture. There I met a handful of instructors like Alonzo Hauser and Zygmunt Spreedy and others. Hauser once had a studio in Prescott adjacent to what is now the Prescott Roadhouse restaurant. After college, I taught for 4 years in Illinois and in Iowa, returning to the Twin Cities in '72. I reconnected with Paul Kramer, who I had met 10 years earlier. Who was a director of the St. Paul School of Art and had an art gallery, and was himself just a superb painter, very well trained. When I returned back to St. Paul in 1972, some divine inspiration led me to inquire of Paul Kramer who he thought the 6 most successful living Minnesota artists were. Without hesitation, he gave me their names: Stanford Fennell, Clem Halpers, Cameron Booth, Adolf Wedin, Paul Van Ryzen, and Alonzo Hauser. Well, I already knew Alonzo Hauser because he was one of my instructors at the university. Some messianic voice told me to meet all of them. For some accidental reason, I did not contact Adolf Wedin, though I did meet him later. I did meet Halpers, Fennell, Van Ryzen, and Booth. Clement Halpers lived close to my home and became a very close friend for the last 10 years of his life. From all, I gleaned important insights about art. Over time, I was able to acquire pieces of their work as permanent reminders. I started my own business in 1972 in architecture and had little time in those years to paint. I did work at creating 1 painting a month. Also, I forced myself to learn to paint quickly. I don't know if that was a good thing or not, but time will tell. Oh, there's been a lot of time. Anyway, also I forced myself to paint quickly because I believe many artists have injured their careers by saying or thinking, "Don't hurry me, I'm creating a work of art." We all need a bit of prodding in life. It took me a long time to be dedicated enough to my art to take the chance of being seen sitting on a street corner painting when I might have been working at my drafting board completing the drawings for which someone was waiting, which of course this actually happened. Someone mentioned to me that if I weren't sitting out on that street corner with my painting easel and so forth, that maybe they could get their drawings in a more timely manner. But I got over that. At times, as photography has come to put the power of making wonderful images as close as your phone, I have wondered about painting. I have come to be certain that a painting is not a photograph. Each painter signs every painting in each brushstroke. We leave our indelible, very human print on what we make. Art instruction is important. Learning to look at the work of others has been important. Friendships among artists are important. And for me, collecting and selling art has been important. At 57 years after it started, art is my positive addiction. Well, that ends my prepared notes. Thank you. Now, what you see, this sorry collection of things around here, is the gleanings from my studio from the last several years. And some of them are almost good and some of them aren't. Some of the bad ones have good names, some of the good ones have bad names.
What determines a good painting, Tom? I mean, isn't it something that I would like would be a good painting?
Yeah, well, I've often thought that a work of art should be beautiful. You know, there's some dispute about that among a lot of artists as to whether art needs to be a thing of beauty, but I kind of ascribe to that theory. You know, there's one there, for example, this view of Maiden Rock, which is a view in the village park of Maiden Rock, which is, you know, that painting kind of expresses, that's one of my more recent paintings, and it kind of, I think, can speak to you because we all know the historic profile of Maiden Rock. It's been painted by everybody from Frederick Remington up to myself, and it's still blue when seen in the distance after all that painting. Oh, that was funny. That was a joke. That's like some of my good titles and bad titles. But I do like to paint local, regional things when I can. Once in a while I go really off the track, and I paint some sort of fantasy paintings, of which there's 3 over there. And one of them has a really good title, not much of a painting. The upper one, the one above the fire extinguisher, is titled If Edward Cortez Lived in Milwaukee. And of course you have to kind of be an art history buff to remember who Edward Cortez was, but he is the man who invented the after the rainstorm painting of Paris street scenes. And he did them from 1890 to 1940. And so the one above the fire extinguisher is titled, that's a great title, If Edward Cortez Lived in Milwaukee. Certainly not the Paris street scene, and certainly don't really look anything like his work, but it does, there's some reflections on the recently rain-covered street there. Actually, the newest painting here is the little tiny one at the bottom there, which is just called Garage in Maiden Rock, Wisconsin. And then there's a barn there, and maybe the very recent one is our own house over here next to that door. And so if there's any questions, more than happy to answer. Otherwise,
Where's the bigger one there, that middle? Is that in Maiden Rock?
that's the Maiden Rock Park.
Oh,
And it's a view you don't really see. You have to go to our next speaker's place of business, park your car, and look to the south. And then you look across the railroad track and you see this rather strange park shelter that was a gift to the village by the welders at the sand mine in Maiden Rock. And so there is this public park shelter that is very frail looking. It's welded together fairly well. And but I thought there's some kind of, just something about these trees dancing and looking through them. You know, and of course they're cottonwood trees. And I think it took me years to develop any real respect for cottonwood trees. Because you spend all your time cleaning out the cotton from your screens and your mechanical equipment and whatever, but you know, they really are kind of those trees are very large. I mean, they're 2 feet in diameter or more. And they'd certainly like to live in river bottoms, and they're really kind of an endemic part of our landscape that we don't treat with much respect. You know, they're so big, and we think the lumber is so worthless. However, I was talking with a guy who does cabinet work lately in the town of Prescott, Wisconsin, just last week, and I learned something. It's very hard to teach me anything. And I said, well, you're going to make this thing out of poplar. And he said, oh yeah. So he took this piece of greenish sort of wood out of his inventory and made the little piece that I wanted made. And he said, you know, what they're selling as poplar is actually cottonwood. And I said, really? He said, oh yeah. So anyway, I learned something. You know, poplar is a tree that we identify here in the northern regions as kind of having yellowish bark. Sort of looks a little like a birch, grows in groves, you know, and they don't grow real large here. There are a whole bunch of species of poplar. There's Lombardy poplar that grow real tall. There's whatever. But so I learned something about that you actually can make good trim wood out of these big cottonwood trees. But he said that most of the poplars are cut smaller, and they come from the southeast. The poplar that is used for trim today. There's a Prescott painting here. Back here on the right-hand side there are flowers that were growing right here in River City. There's lilacs and bleeding heart that are Prescott opaque.